revenue of a building that's not fairly well thought out, where you're going with it, what you're doing with it. So a big part of this study is understanding what we're doing, knowing what our needs are, dealing with that, assessing that, and dealing with our stakeholders and dealing with everybody else here. If you don't have an idea of what you're building, you're not going to be able to figure out how much it costs to run it or how much it's going to make.
Granted, but you've drawn up plans of a certain building that you're proposing, and that's the feasibility of an operational budget on the proposed building should not be hard to come up with.
And again, what I've done is gone way beyond any normal feasibility study to come up with plans that actually, can allow us to give us an operational revenue generation out of it. And of course, one of the big things of the whole thing is how much does it cost to build it? Not just what does it make and what does it cost to run.
But in order to have a feasibility study under the line, you have to have an expense and income and operation.
So I'd like to understand a little more about you're disappointed about.
Well, because when we started out, I believe the deadline for this phase 1 was sometime here in April, right? Yeah. And at the end of that, we were supposed to have a full-fledged feasibility study. And the feasibility study, the way I understand the feasibility study, I've seen several of them, they have a cost, as in building cost, construction cost, then an operational cost, and then an income part to make an understanding of what it would take to actually build it, what it will take to run it, what it will take to actually, what type of funds are coming back in it. That's usually what.
Well, that is actually the biggest part of our feasibility study.
Correct.
Is understanding the revenue and the operation.
That's right.
But you cannot do that unless you understand what you're building. The other thing that I've seen in a lot of feasibility studies is that they're looking at building the building in the first place. So it's completely conceptual. We are in the middle of building. We have started construction. So the parameters that exist, which is what I found out while doing this study, are a little bit different than starting from scratch. Should we even build this and then just mock up some numbers on a potential cost and then mark up some numbers for operational? You can crank that stuff out left, right, and center. But when you've got an operating facility, it's a whole different thing. And when you've started construction, it's another thing. So you really have to understand your scope of work very well before you proceed with this type of thing, which this facility has engaged.
So the answer, I think one of the things we need to look at is, first one, we were supposed to be ready earlier, but as I presented in the last session, we purposely delayed this till April 30th for the mitigating circumstances and so on. That's number one. Number two, what we really wanted to do is, yes, notionally speaking, there's revenues, there's expenses per square foot, and so on. So that is available. But the first and fundamental is, as opposed to forcing Brent, for example, to go through detailed economics, because we're not talking just, Kelly's looking at project economics, but our treasurer needs to look at financial economics, cost of capital, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely.
What we wanted to do is for this group to first rationalize as to this basis appropriate to hand information over to Brent to now crunch that financial model. Right? Is one of the if you could just flip to the last page or second last page under challenges, the last bullet, financing strategy. That's going to be, that will pretty much dictate, are we talking about money that's at 5%? Or is it a cost of money that's at 25%? Or frankly, can we not afford it and we need to kick it over to somebody else?
Correct.
But before we run those permutations, we want to get full engagement as to, does this represent the appropriate baseline for this group?
I understand that. I just expected that part to be covered already. Like I expected.
But how could we, if this board,
like to me,
if this is the first time effectively that this board is seeing the utilization, right?
Well, what I'm saying is, to me, when I see feasibility study at the end of it, that should be there.
But
right?
You're not seeing a feasibility study. We're still 3 days away.
Okay. I'll give you 3 days.
That's my point.
All right. I'll withhold my comment until 3 days.
No, hey, your question was fair. All
Okay.
I'm saying is you're getting something, before effectively it's due
Okay.
for review and rationalization.
Okay.